Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are completely unpacking the fascinating evolution of one of the absolute most influential political ideological ideologies in Western history, liberalism. We're going to trace its journey from the rigid, old-school structures of feudalism all the way to the great ideological split between its classical and modern forms. But hey, before we get too deep in the weeds, let's start with a really simple question. What does the word liberal actually mean? I mean, historically, this term has meant everything from a generous, quote-unquote, liberal helping of food to just being open-minded, all the way to describing a massive world-shaping political system. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're starting with the origins of liberalism. Then we'll explore its core themes and values, look at government and democracy, and finally, unpack classical versus modern liberalism.
So, Section 1, the origins of liberalism.
To really ground our understanding before we hit the abstract theory, we have to look at how this ideology was born right out of the breakdown of feudalism in Europe. The root of the term actually goes all the way back to the 14th century, from the Latin liber, which referred to free men, specifically people who were neither serfs nor slaves. Fast forward to the 17th and 18th centuries, and we see these emerging ideas directly fueling the English, American, and French revolutions. By the time we hit the 19th century, industrialization has spread like wildfire, and it triumphantly becomes known as the liberal century.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how these early ideas radically challenged absolute monarchs. Instead of a feudal system defined by the absolute power of kings who supposedly had a divine right to rule, an emerging market society started championing constitutionalism and individualism. Early liberals were seeking fundamental reform, totally rejecting the massive unfairness of having your entire social position determined just by the accident of your birth. Moving right along to Section 2, core themes and values. Let's shift gears and unpack the core DNA here. Individualism is the absolute heartbeat of liberal ideology. See, under feudalism, people didn't really have unique identities. Your life was entirely dictated by your social group, your village, or your class. But liberalism completely flips the script. It shifts the focus entirely to the supreme importance of the unique, rational human being. Society is suddenly viewed from the bottom up, right from the perspective of the individual. And logically, if the individual is supreme, well then freedom or liberty is naturally the supreme individualist value. It's the unifying principle of the whole ideology. Early liberals viewed liberty as a natural right. Basically, it's the absolute necessary condition for leading a truly human existence, exercising your own choice and actually fulfilling your personal potential. But of course, freedom isn't just a free-for-all. John Stuart Mill perfectly captures how theorists draw the line to prevent absolute freedom from becoming a license to just abuse others. He wrote, "The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others." And you'll often hear this referred to as the famous harm principle. Beyond individualism and freedom, we've got three more core pillars rapidly holding this up. First is reason, born from Enlightenment rationalism, which emancipates us from superstition. Then there's justice, which is grounded in foundational equality and a belief in a meritocracy, the idea of a level playing field. And finally, toleration, which defends diversity and pluralism to theoretically build a balanced, progressing society.
Section 3, Government and Democracy. Now, unlike anarchists, liberals don't actually think we can just exist without government. Because let's be real, there's a legitimate fear that totally free individuals might exploit each other, steal property, or break agreements. This led thinkers like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke to propose the social contract. It's this idea of a hypothetical agreement where people decide to escape a chaotic, stateless state of nature by creating a sovereign referee. But importantly, it's a referee created strictly by the consent of the governed. So, the crucial point is that early thinkers believed government should only exist for a few very specific, limited reasons. John Locke argued for a night watchman role. Its minimal functions are literally just maintaining public order and protecting property, providing defense against external attacks, and ensuring that contracts are enforced. That's it. The rest of life is left to private individuals. You might be wondering, why keep government so radically small? Well, it comes down to a deep-seated fear of arbitrary power. Liberals generally believe human beings are inherently self-seeking, so egoism plus power equals corruption. This fear is perfectly immortalized in Lord Acton's iconic warning, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." And this brilliantly illustrates how constitutionalism and the separation of powers aim to solve that immense danger. Think of the U.S. Constitution.
By separating legislative, executive, and judicial branches, the goal is to purposefully fragment government power. Power becomes a check to power, which ultimately protects the liberty of the individual from the state itself.
Which brings us to a really fascinating historical tension: democratic ambivalence. While we closely associate liberalism with democracy today, early theorists actually feared majoritarian democracy. Alexis de Tocqueville famously warned against the tyranny of the majority. The fear was that the rule of the 51% could just crush individual liberty and minority property rights. It's an incredibly delicate balancing act.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 4, the culmination of our explainer, classical versus modern liberalism. To really grasp this great split, you've got to look at the historical context on the ground. Classical liberalism flourished during early 19th century industrialization, but as industrial capitalism created immense wealth for some, it also resulted in slums, deep poverty, and stark social inequality. Those harsh realities essentially forced later thinkers to revise that minimal state doctrine. They argued that unrestrained self-interest just wasn't producing a just society, and that realization gave birth to modern liberalism. So, a massive theoretical shift happens right here. Classical liberalism believes in negative freedom, which is basically the idea that people should just be left alone, completely free from external constraints. It leans heavily on egoistical individualism and strict self-reliance. Modern liberalism, on the other hand, shifts the goalpost to positive freedom. That's all about actively achieving self-mastery and true autonomy. It embraces developmental individualism, prioritizing human flourishing and personal development over mere self-interest. And naturally, that shift translates directly into how these two branches view the state and the economy. For the classical branch, the state is just a minimal night watchman, a necessary evil, and the economy should be a strictly laissez-faire free market. Modern liberals see the state entirely differently, as an enabling, interventionist institution that actively manages the economy to help people actually help themselves. Just jumping back to that classical perspective for a second, we have to mention Adam Smith. He famously wrote, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest." This perfectly summarizes that classic belief in the invisible hand, the idea that self-regulating market forces naturally promote economic prosperity without any government interference whatsoever. Fast forward to today, and this exact theoretical split is what drives our modern debate over justice. On one side, you have the classical idea of a stripped meritocracy, where inequalities are seen as natural reflections of unequal talent and hard work. On the flip side is the modern view of social justice, championed by thinkers like John Rawls, who argue that economic inequality is justifiable only if it ultimately works to the benefit of the poorest in society. But, it's important to note those classical ideas didn't just fade away into history. They actually survived and evolved into neoliberalism in the late 20th century. This was a massive counter-revolution aimed at reversing the trend of big interventionist government, seeking a return to free market fundamentalism. It just goes to show the ongoing, super complex dialectic of these economic ideas. Which leaves us with a massive, enduring philosophical question to chew on. How do we actually balance the ultimate freedom of the individual against the collective needs of the community? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this journey has given you a clearer understanding of the incredibly powerful ideas that have shaped our modern world. Until next time, keep pondering that balance.